Montana Territory, autumn 1879. The wind tore across the hills like it had a bone to pick with the plains, and by the time Clara Norring reached the edge of the rutted road outside Fort Benton, her dress was soaked to the knees and her children were crying. She had not cried. Not once. Not when she'd come home from trading eggs to find the cabin empty. Not when she discovered the savings, everything they had earned from 5 years of backbreaking work gone. Not even when she found the note scrawled in her husband's careless hand, "I'm not made for this life. Do not follow me." She folded the paper once, then again, and dropped it into the stove. "Come on," she whispered to her children, brushing mud from her son's cheek. "We keep walking." Miriam, 8, clung to her skirt with one hand and held her little brother's fingers in the other. Matthew was only 4, sniffling and red-faced, his small boots dragging in the dirt. They had slept in the barn of a kind widow last night, but she had no room for 3 more mouths. Clara had thanked her and left before dawn, before anyone could see the cracks starting to form in her resolve. She never expected to see Everett Halloran again. He rode up out of the dust like something out of a fever dream, tall, lean, sun-browned from years under the Montana sky, and still with that quiet steadiness to him. Years ago, they'd spoken once or twice when he came by their homestead to trade hay for preserves. She had never forgotten his eyes, clear and steady, like glacial water. He pulled his horse to a stop beside them. "Clara," her breath caught. His voice was deeper now, rougher, but unmistakable. She straightened. "Everett." He looked from her to the children, then to the threadbare satchel slung across her shoulder. "Where are you headed?" "I do not know," she said. "Somewhere with work, maybe the fort." He glanced toward the horizon, then back at her. "You look like you haven't eaten in a day." "We have eaten," she said, too quickly. Miriam's stomach growled in protest. Everett dismounted. "I have a home, a few miles west. It is warm, dry, there is food." Clara shook her head. "We will not be someone's burden." "I am offering, not out of pity," he said, "but because I would want someone to help my sister if she was out here with 2 little ones and nothing but a bag." She looked at him, unsure if she wanted to cry or scream. "He left us," she said finally. "Took every cent we had, rode out while I was trading eggs." Everett's jaw tightened. "Then he is a fool." She looked down at her children, then back at him. "You are sure?" "I am." He reached for Matthew with one hand, and the boy blinked up at him before nestling into his arms without a word. Clara's throat tightened. Everett lifted the boy gently and motioned for Miriam to take his free hand. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home." His ranch sat in a shallow valley tucked between 2 hills, just far enough from town to feel like its own world. The house was simple wood walls, a stone fireplace, and a porch that looked out over a pasture, but it was clean and warm, and the scent of coffee and stew filled the air as soon as they stepped inside. Clara helped wash the children's hands while Everett stoked the fire. Once the stew was hot, he served bowls without fuss or apology and set them on the table. The children ate like they had not seen food in days. Clara sat across from him, silent. He did not ask questions. He only said, "You can stay as long as you want. The barn is warm, but the house has more than 1 room. I will not take your bed. I will sleep in the barn if I have to," he said. "The children need a roof." Something cracked inside her, then a kind of quiet collapse. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had folded laundry, planted potatoes, scrubbed floors. The same hands her husband had kissed once, long ago, when promises still felt like they meant something. "I do not understand how a man can leave his children," she said. Everett's voice was low. "Some men only know how to take." The fire popped in the hearth. Matthew had fallen asleep in front of it, curled like a cat on the rug. Miriam leaned against her shoulder, eyelids fluttering. "You are kind," Clara said quietly. "I am not," he replied. "But I know what loss looks like." She met his eyes. "Have you lost someone?" "My brother," he said simply. "War took him." Clara nodded. She did not ask more. She only said, "Thank you." He tipped his head once, a quiet acknowledgement. That night he gave her his bedroom and took the cot in the barn. She tucked the children in and sat at the edge of the bed in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar quiet. The weight on her chest eased just a little. Days passed. Then a week. Clara found herself rising before dawn, helping with chores, milking the cow, gathering eggs, mending a loose fence board. The work was familiar, grounding. Everett never hovered, never asked for more than she could give. The children began to smile again. Miriam helped bake bread. Matthew followed Everett around like a shadow, asking about horses and cattle and how to swing a rope. One evening, Clara stepped out onto the porch to find Everett watching the sky turn pink over the hills. She stood beside him. "I never thought I would feel safe again." He looked at her, really looked at her. "You are safe here." Her hands were still, her heart loud in her chest. "I do not know what comes next. I have no plan." "You do not have to," he said. "Not yet." She turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" He held her gaze. "Because no one did it for me when I needed it, and because I see the way you fight for your children. The way you hold everything together, even when it is falling apart." Her breath caught. "I see you, Clara." And for the first time since her husband vanished, she believed someone truly did. That night, as the wind brushed against the windows and the children slept in their beds, Clara stood in the doorway of the barn. Everett looked up from his cot. "Something wrong?" She stepped inside. "You should not be out here." "I do not mind." "I do," she said. "It is too cold." He watched her for a moment, then stood. "You are not afraid?" She shook her head. "Not with you." He nodded slowly. "I will come inside." And as they walked back toward the house, side by side beneath the stars, something shifted between them, not out of desperation. Not out of loneliness, but something real, something beginning. Snow came early that year, quiet and thick, blanketing the hills in white before November had fully settled in. Clara stood in the doorway of the chicken shed one morning, breath curling from her lips, the basket on her hip already half full. The hens clucked low, feathers ruffled against the cold. She worked quickly, fingers stinging as she reached beneath warm bodies and tucked the eggs into straw. Behind her, the crunch of boots in frost-laced grass told her Everett had come from the barn. She didn't turn. "You always rise before the sun?" he asked. "I used to," she said, brushing straw from her skirts. "Stopped for a while. I'm trying again." He nodded and handed her a folded wool shawl. "Take this. It's colder than it looks." She hesitated before draping it over her shoulders. "Thank you." They walked back toward the house together, the snow giving a soft hush to everything. The children were still asleep inside, their breath fogging the window panes. Everett broke the silence. "I've been thinking about next spring. I could use help with the calves if you're willing. It'll give you a share of the beef when it's time." "I'm not asking to be paid," she said quickly. "I'm not offering charity," he answered. "I'm offering partnership." "The land's too much for one man." Clara paused at the porch steps. "You mean to keep me here that long?" "I mean to give you a choice." In the kitchen, she lit the stove and set a pot of oats to boil while he brought in more wood. The sounds of the house waking up were soft and real, the clink of tin bowls, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of blankets as Miriam stirred. Later that afternoon, Clara found Everett in the tack shed, sleeves rolled, oiling leather with slow care. She stepped inside, wiping her palms on her apron. "I want to learn to ride," she said. He looked up. "You've never," she shook her head. "My husband wouldn't let me, said it wasn't proper." Everett set the tin aside and stood. "We'll start tomorrow. I'll bring out the gelding with the quiet eyes." The next morning, while Miriam kept Matthew close inside, Clara stood in the pasture, gripping the saddle horn tighter than she meant to. Everett adjusted the stirrups, then stepped back. "You aren't going to fall," he said. "But if you do, you'll get up." She nodded, swung one leg over and sat. The horse shifted beneath her and she stiffened. "Let him breathe," Everett said gently. "He knows you're scared." "I'm not scared," she said. "Good," he replied. "Then let's ride." They circled the pasture twice. He walked beside her, one hand near the bridle, his voice steady. She focused on the rhythm, on the way the saddle moved with her, on the cold wind across her face. When they stopped, her cheeks were red from more than the cold. "I didn't fall. I told you you wouldn't." She looked down at him. "You're a patient man." He lifted his gaze, quiet amusement in his eyes. "Not always, just with the right people." Clara dismounted, legs shaking. She didn't speak again until they were inside, warming their hands near the stove while the children played with wooden blocks Everett had carved long ago. "My mother was a seamstress," she said suddenly. "She taught me to stitch before I could read." Everett didn't interrupt. "She died when I was 16. My father remarried within the year. I left not long after." He nodded once, respectful. "I married too young," she said. "I thought if I worked hard enough, he might stay." Everett's voice was quiet. "Some men don't deserve the effort." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw not just the steadiness but something else. A man who had known silence, who had rebuilt things with his hands because no one else would do it for him. "I want to make something new," she said. "Not just survive. You already are," he said. "Every morning you wake up and choose to keep going. That's building something." That night, after the children were settled and the fire burned low, Everett paused at the kitchen doorway where Clara sat mending a pair of trousers. "I've been meaning to ask," he said. "What's your favorite time of day?" She looked up, thread between her fingers. "Evening," she said. "After the work's done, when the world quiets and you can feel the day settle in your bones." He nodded. "Mine too," she smiled, faint and real. "Maybe we'll share more evenings then," and he answered without hesitation. "I'd like that." The days shortened until the sun barely cleared the ridge before sliding back behind it, and the wind carried a sharper edge that chapped lips and reddened hands. Clara stitched a patch onto Miriam's coat while Everett hauled water from the well, his breath fogging the air. Inside, the fire gave off a steady heat, and Matthew lay on his belly near the hearth, tracing lines in the ash with a splinter of wood. That morning, Everett had ridden out early to check the southern fence, leaving behind a note scratched on the corner of a feed sack and a piece of dried apple on the table for each child. When he returned near dusk, Clara was already ladling soup into bowls, her sleeves rolled and her hair swept up with a bit of twine. He dusted the snow from his shoulders. "Found tracks near the creek. Coyote maybe. I'll set something out tomorrow." She nodded. "How far down?" "Near the bend where the cottonwoods thin out." Clara set a bowl in front of him and tucked a curl behind her ear. "I'll come with you if you have to set traps. I'd like to learn." Everett looked at her for a moment before answering. "All right, but bring the thick gloves. Steel bites if your fingers slip." That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Clara remained at the kitchen table, her eyes scanning the last few lines of a letter she hadn't shown anyone. It was from her older cousin in Iowa, dated 2 months back, offering to take her and the children in for the winter. The envelope lay beside it, edges softened from use. She didn't hear Everett's steps until he leaned against the doorframe. "You thinking of leaving?" Her fingers pressed against the paper, then released it. "She means well, but she's got 7 mouths already and no land of her own." Everett crossed the room, pulled out the chair across from her, and sat. "You don't owe me an answer. But if you're weighing it, I'd like to know why." Clara folded the letter. "I'm tired of not knowing what comes next, of waiting for the other shoe to fall." He watched her hands. "You think something will?" "I don't know," she said. "But this house, it's calm. It feels almost like a beginning. And beginnings scare me." Everett leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You've earned more than just a safe place. You've earned the right to choose what's next." Her voice dropped. "What if I choose wrong again?" "You didn't choose wrong," he said. He did. They let the silence settle around them until the wind rattled the shutters. Clara looked past him toward the hallway. "Miriam asked today if this was where we live now." Everett kept his eyes on her. "What did you tell her?" "I said it depends." He nodded once. "Then maybe it depends on me telling you this place is yours if you want it to be." Her breath trembled on the way out. "And if I stayed, would I still just be helping with the calves come spring?" "No," he said. "You'd be building something with me, not for me." Clara reached across the table and laid her hand over his. His was rough, warm. He didn't move, just let it be. "I don't need a rescue," she said. "I know. I need someone who'll stay." "I have no plans to leave," he answered. "Not now." "Not ever." She gave a small nod, then stood slowly. "I'll check on the children." Everett stayed at the table, watching the fire throw gold across the walls. When she returned a few minutes later, she didn't go back to her chair. Instead, she crossed the room, hesitated only a moment, and sat beside him on the long bench. Their shoulders brushed, neither pulled away. Outside, snow whispered against the roof. Inside, something steadier took root, not sudden, not loud. Just the quiet certainty of two people choosing each other, one evening at a time. The January thaw came sudden and strange, turning the snow to slush and drawing the scent of wet earth up through the breeze. Clara stood at the edge of the garden plot behind the house, her boots sinking slightly into the softening ground. She held a spade Everett had lent her and pressed the blade into the soil, testing its give. It wasn't planting time yet, not by weeks, but she liked knowing what waited beneath. From behind her, Everett's voice carried low. "You thinking on what to grow?" She turned slightly, sun catching the fine hairs at her temple. "Cabbage, maybe beans if the season's long enough." He stepped beside her, a coil of fence wire slung over one shoulder. "I've still got seed in the cellar." Had no reason to plant last year. Clara brushed her gloved hand over the turned patch. "You do now." He looked at her then, not with the weight of expectation, but with something steadier recognition. "That cellar's yours to sort through when you're ready. I'll take a look tomorrow," she said. "After I finish hemming Matthew's sleeves, he's grown again." Everett smiled with his eyes, not his mouth. "He's been chasing the calves like he wants to rope one. He told me he's going to be a man who fixes things." She lifted her gaze to his. "He meant you." He didn't answer right away. "I want to be someone worth looking up to." Clara set the spade aside and dusted her hands. "You already are." They walked back to the house without speaking. The warmth between them had changed shape in recent weeks, not sharp, not rushing, but like something built plank by plank, each gesture laid atop the last. After supper, while the children played with wooden animals Everett had carved from scrap pine, Clara sat at the hearth working a new bodice from a bolt of blue calico she'd found in the loft. Everett joined her with a small ledger in hand, its corners worn. "I've been keeping records," he said, easing into the chair across from her. "Just numbers, mostly, grain, fencing, medicine, but I want to add you." She set the needle down. "What do you mean, if we're running this place together?" he said. "You ought to be in the book, half of everything." "Not just the chores, Clara. Name on the land, on the herd, all of it." She looked at him, the firelight catching the curve of her jaw. "You want to tie me to this land by ink?" "No," he said. "By truth, you've already tied yourself by your hands." She didn't answer for a long time. Then, in a voice soft but without uncertainty, "I want that." He slid the ledger across the table. "Then tomorrow we'll go into Fort Benton, have the deed adjusted." Her brows lifted. "That's simple?" "Not for most," he said, "but I've known the clerk since he was knee-high. And I've never asked him for a favor." She nodded. "Then we'll go." Later that night, after the children had been tucked in with quilts and quiet stories, Clara moved to the doorway of Everett's room. He was inside, folding a flannel shirt with the slow, methodical care of a man who didn't like waste. "I don't want to sleep in separate rooms anymore," she said. He looked up, not surprised, just waiting. "I'm not asking for anything rushed," she said. "But I want to wake where I belong." He crossed the room and stopped just before her. "And where's that?" She lifted her eyes, steady. "Beside you." Everett reached out, not to pull her in, but to rest his hand at her waist, fingers grazing the worn cotton of her dress. "Then stay." They didn't kiss, not yet, but the space between them was gone, the waiting finished. That night, when she lay beside him under the same quilt, he didn't speak. He only curled one arm around her waist, not possessive but certain, and she breathed in the cedar scent of his shirt and let herself sleep deeper than she had in years. In the morning, they would ride into town, sign their names on paper, and return to the valley not as tenant and host but as partners. And when spring did arrive for real, Clara would plant her cabbage and beans, and Everett would build them a new henhouse with Matthew at his heels. Miriam would grow into her mother's calm, and Clara would wake each morning knowing she was no longer waiting to begin. She already had. The ride into Fort Benton took half the morning, the road still soft in places from the thaw. Clara held the reins while Everett cleared a fallen branch from the trail ahead. Miriam sat between them on the wagon seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap, while Matthew napped against a folded wool coat in the back, lulled to sleep by the sway of the wheels. "I've never seen the land this wet," Clara said, watching the wheel ruts fill with meltwater as they passed. Everett brushed his gloves against his thigh. Creek's up by a good foot. I'll check the south pasture fence again when we get back. If it goes much higher, we'll need to move the calves to the upper slope, Clara nodded. I'll ready the feed bins in the loft. There's space. They didn't speak again until town came into view, the smoke from cook stoves curling into the pale sky. The town moved slow this time of year, mud and slush hemming in wagons and boots alike. Outside the land office, Everett lifted Matthew into his arms without waking him and nodded for Clara and Miriam to follow. Inside, the warmth hit hard after the cold, and the scent of ink and wool coats hung in the air. The clerk, a man with a pale mustache and a limp, stood behind the desk. He recognized Everett at once. "You're late by 3 years and 6 winters," he said, eyes narrowing with familiarity. Everett set Matthew down on a chair, still asleep. Didn't have reason to make changes till now. The clerk thumbed through a ledger and pulled out a folded sheet. "And now you do," Clara stepped forward. "We'd like the deed revised, joint ownership." The clerk looked between them. "You married?" "No," Everett said, "but we live together, work the land together, raise the children together." The man studied Clara's face, then Everett's, then shrugged. "Long as both names go down, it's legal." They signed in silence. When it was done, the clerk sanded the ink and pushed the paper into a canvas envelope. "Take care of that," he said. "Paper's thin this time of year." Outside, Everett handed Clara the envelope. She held it like something fragile and weighty, folded it once, and slid it into her satchel. "Feels strange," she said, seeing it written. Everett helped her back into the wagon. "It's not just written, it's real." They didn't rush the return trip. The sun had climbed higher, and the children were quiet, watching the thawed river slide beneath the cottonwoods. When they passed the old fork where the trail turned toward the abandoned mine, Everett slowed the horses. "I used to think I'd end up working there," he said. "Didn't see much beyond the next day for a long time." Clara looked at him, his face cut in profile by the low light. "And now," he turned toward her, "now I see further." That night back home, Clara found herself standing in the bedroom, alone for a moment, the firelight flickering across the quilt. The children were asleep, their limbs tangled in blankets and the smell of wood smoke clinging to their hair. She touched the edge of the window pane, still cold, and watched Everett cross the yard from the barn, lantern swinging low. She met him at the door. He set the lantern on the bench and wiped his boots. "I've been thinking," she said. "We could build another room come summer, a space for sewing. Or reading, somewhere quiet." He stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind him. "We will. I want to stay here," he nodded once. "You already do." "No," she said, stepping closer, her voice low and certain. "I want to stay as your wife." He stilled, then reached for her hands. "Are you asking?" She smiled. "I am." His voice came soft. "Then yes, yes, Clara, as soon as the ground's dry enough to gather folks." They married 3 weeks later under the budding branches of the lone cottonwood behind the house. Everett carved a bench from the pine that had fallen by the creek, and Clara hemmed her dress from the bolt of blue calico she'd saved. The children stood beside them, hands clasped tight. The neighbors came in wagons and on horseback, bringing bread and jars of preserved peaches, and a fiddler played long into the dusk. Everett didn't say much, but his hand never left Clara's, and the way he looked at her made speech unnecessary. By summer, the garden had grown thick with green. The calves were weaned, and Everett built the second room with help from a neighbor. Clara filled it with shelves and a rocking chair, and sometimes, when the house was quiet and the children off by the creek, Everett would find her there, stitching or reading or simply looking out the window. One night, as the stars settled into their places overhead and the fire burned low, Clara sat beside Everett on the porch bench he'd carved. Matthew and Miriam had fallen asleep on a quilt behind them, the day's dust still on their cheeks. Clara leaned her head against Everett's shoulder. "Do you miss the quiet from before?" He wrapped his arm around her. "Not for a second." She smiled, listening to the frogs by the creek and the soft breath of her children sleeping nearby. "I never thought I'd find this," she said. He kissed her temple, slow and sure. "You didn't find it. You built it." And in the hush of the Montana night, with the scent of pine and damp soil rising from the earth, Clara Halloran knew she had come home for good.